Thank you very much, Senator Singh. Senator Lyons.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. In just over 2 weeks, Western Australian voters will make history when they become the first electors to vote in a standalone half-Senate election. This election provides a unique opportunity for Western Australians to take a close look at what the Prime Minister Abbott said and promised when in opposition, and what is actually delivered in government. Just over a year ago, whilst in opposition, Mr Abbott said how much he admired and respected the West Australian Premier and how much he wished to model himself on Mr Barnett. At the Liberal campaign launch for the Western Australian state election, Mr Abbott said, and I quote, "How much I respect the Premier of this state, how much I have learned from him, how much I wish to model myself on him, should I get the opportunity to lead our country." End quote. So obviously, for a big clue about how Prime Minister Abbott wants to lead and the sorts of policies his government will pursue, we need look no further than Premier Barnett's record. And what a record it is. A record of broken promises on road, on rail, on infrastructure, on education and on health. Premier Barnett began his second term by losing Western Australia's AAA credit rating. And what's more, Premier Barnett showed his complete lack of understanding of our economy in Western Australia when he said it didn't matter much. In another interview, Premier Barnett said, and I quote, "Debt is high and is rising. Why? Because the state is growing." End quote. Mr Barnett went on to say further that his government was investing in hospitals, in schools and improving our capital city, in rail projects, regional development and the like. And Mr Barnett then went on to say he didn't apologise for the high debt. But actually he hasn't delivered on any of those promises, not one of them, because every single infrastructure project he promised before the election has now been scrapped. And then there are the cuts, severe cuts in Western Australia, cuts that come as a result of further broken promises. And of course, with Prime Minister Abbott, we've already seen broken promises on a number of key issues, particularly education. So far the Prime Minister is being like his role model, the Premier of Western Australia. So in addition to losing our AAA credit rating, Premier Barnett has cut $183 million out of Western Australian schools, 500 jobs, and he stood there with his Minister for Education and announced in the Parliament that 500 jobs were to go, as if that was some proud milestone achievement. There is no money for capital infrastructure. There is no money for capital investment. These cuts go further than that because they scrap programs which were aimed at supporting vulnerable children. Against his election promise, where he guaranteed to deliver the highest standard of education, he went further and promised superbly built and designed schools, and yet we've seen school capital investment slashed, school after school, throughout the whole state of Western Australia. Schools where people thought were going to be built and probably voted on the basis of that have now been scrapped. So school upgrades have been scrapped, along with 500 jobs. And on top of these cuts, these severe cuts to Western Australian education, the backflip of the Prime Minister Abbott and Minister Pyne's unity ticket on Labor's fairer and more equitable funding plan designed to improve student performance, the Prime Minister joins Premier Barnett and breaks that promise on education. So yes, the West Australian Liberal Premier and the Prime Minister Tony Abbott are alike. Neither can be trusted on school education. But Premier Barnett's cuts and broken promises go on an almost daily basis. Road funding cut, light rail cut, airport line cut. It's impossible in Western Australia to take public transport to our international airport. Absolutely impossible. There is no public transport available for visitors visiting from other states and overseas if they are using the international airport. What an embarrassment. And on health, the Premier and the Prime Minister are on a unity ticket. A unity ticket of ignoring the health of Western Australians. Our state-of-the-art, brand new flagship hospital, Fiona Stanley, is a mess. It is like something out of the comedy show Yes Minister. It's a complete fail by the Barnett government. Fully costed and paid for under Labor, but wrecked under Barnett. It remains closed. It's closed and scheduled to open not in a couple of months, it's at least 1 year behind its scheduled opening time. And in addition to that, Premier Barnett, the Liberal Premier of WA, has contracted out almost all of the services at Fiona Stanley Hospital. And who have they contracted them out to? The detention centre contractor, Serco, with no track record of running hospitals in Australia. Its only track record is in running prisons. And the cost of Fiona Stanley, our flagship hospital, being closed, there's a daily cost of $261,000 a day, more than $250,000 day after day that hospital is closed. On that alone, the Prime Minister's role model, Premier Barnett, should resign. $250,000 a day of Western Australia's money just going down the drain at Fiona Stanley Hospital. But Mr Abbott and Mr Premier Barnett's unity ticket on health doesn't stop there. The WA Liberal Premier has backflipped on the new Children's Hospital and has been criticised by all health professionals, including the AMA, for again failing to deliver what Mr Barnett promised to. And this again becomes like something out of Yes Minister. Despite completed architectural plans, the size of the Children's Hospital has been scaled back from 3 floors, which was promised at the election, to 2. And what does our Premier say about that? Well, he thinks you can simply put another floor on once the hospital is complete and there's more demonstrated need. Again, all the experts have said that's impossible, and even if you did it, it would cost triple what it would currently cost. And what is our Prime Minister's record on health? Well, let's look at Medicare locals. Who knows what the eventual fate of Medicare locals will be? The Prime Minister still hasn't quite finished flipping and flopping on their fate. Originally destined for the scrap heap under a coalition government, we were told, in the lead-up to the election campaign. And then perhaps the Prime Minister visited one and saw that they were actually quite a vital part of local communities. But in any event, we then got an election promise to keep them. And now, of course, once in government, they are under review by the Prime Minister. Medicare locals are playing a vital role in the delivery of health services in Western Australia. Just one example is the provision of health services to vulnerable people in Western Australia, in local communities, and that program is the Street Doctor program. These services provide street access to GPs, providing access to people who would not ever access mainstream health services, whether it's their local GP or an emergency department. These are generally homeless people or people with complex mental health needs who simply don't access the sorts of GP and other specialist services they need, but they do access the street doctor program. Watch this space, I say, because I know that the word review, uttered from the mouth of the Prime Minister, does mean cuts. The RAC, our local automobile club, has called on the state government, the Premier, the man the Prime Minister wants to model himself on, that now is not the time to shelve vital infrastructure projects. For those truly interested in Western Australia, which is obviously not Premier Barnett nor the Prime Minister, congestion is a major problem, and neither the PM nor Premier Barnett have shown any interest or inclination in fixing this issue. And of course we know congestion is a cost to business. It impacts on productivity and revenue and is a weight on the economy which can't be ignored, according to the RAC. The RAC goes further to say that congestion by 2020 in Perth, whilst the Premier sits by and does nothing, will be a great cost to our economy, a cost of $2.1 billion every year. The Perth Lord Mayor has criticised the decision to delay the light rail project. The Lord Mayor says the decision came as a shock. A lot of work had been done in leading up towards an implementation of the light rail system. But of course the Lord Mayor is very disappointed to hear of the cancellation of the light rail route. And again, the Lord Mayor was promised to commit funds to this and very supportive of an idea of light rail to provide greater public transportation for a lot of people. And then there's the community of Ellenbrook. Well, Ellenbrook must have really upset Premier Barnett, because it's been promised light rail, it's been promised fast transit buses, it's been promised a new high school. And for that community of Ellenbrook, which is incredibly isolated in the eastern suburbs of Western Australia, all of that has now been shelved. Every single project up for consideration promised to the residents of Ellenbrook during the last state election has now been scrapped. So this makes me wonder if the Prime Minister still thinks that modelling himself on the Premier of WA is a good idea, after the mess that Premier Barnett has made on the WA economy, our roads, our rail systems, our schools and our hospitals. And the Prime Minister is adding to the woes of the business and community groups in Western Australia by refusing to commit to a range of social welfare programs whose funding will finish at the end of this month. The Prime Minister won't commit to the National Partnership Agreement on homelessness. He won't commit to the National Rental Affordability Scheme. He won't commit to fund emergency relief, and he won't commit to fund financial counselling. This means community organisations using these funds to support vulnerable West Australians will be left high and dry, along with their clients, in the next month or two, unless the Prime Minister makes a commitment now. These are real issues that affect Western Australians every single day, and the great work that our community organisations do in providing for those who are least able to provide them for themselves is just being ignored by the Prime Minister. And this is all on show for Western Australians who, in just a couple of weeks, on the 5th of April, will vote again in a unique half-Senate election, and they will be looking at the Liberal government's record, and it will leave them wanting. It will leave them wanting. And what does the Prime Minister, and indeed the West Australian Liberal senators up for election, think about Western Australia? Well, judging by the comments they make in the Senate, Liberal senators see WA as one huge mining town, because that is all they ever talk about, is they only ever talk about the mining industry, rubbing their hands together, thinking of all of the iron ore, oil and gas dollars that they can bring for the government. And they continue to mislead Western Australian voters on the carbon tax. And Labor attempted to amend the clean energy bills to scrap the carbon tax and bring forward an ETS, but the government and the Greens voted against Labor's amendments. In my view, and in the views of many Western Australians, it suits the government to keep the carbon tax, to continue to try and mislead Western Australian voters before the half-Senate election. How long will their lies continue? But their lies are not having an effect, because Western Australians can see for themselves as they drive around the city, as they get caught up in the horrific congestion problems that Western Australians have every day. They can see the mess that Premier Barnett has made of Fiona Stanley Hospital, which is costing all Western Australians $250,000 every single day because of the inept action of Premier Colin Barnett in not being able to manage getting that hospital open. I don't know of another hospital that's 12 months at least over its opening date, and we're a long way from April next year, so who knows what the date will be when we get to 2015. There are many issues in Western Australia that the Prime Minister Abbott and his Liberal Western Australian senators are ignoring. The high cost of housing in Western Australia. The Prime Minister believes the market will provide and thinks a booming housing market, a market where the cost of housing is increasing, is somehow good for our community. He has yet to explain how first home buyers get a foot into this booming market as house prices increasingly move out of their reach. Housing stress is a real issue in Western Australia, but one ignored by the Prime Minister and Liberal senators. And the Prime Minister and Liberal senators will shut down trade training centres. They've obviously never visited the Pinjarra-Waroona Trade Training Centre to see the partnerships it has created with local businesses and to see how the students and teachers are very proud of their brand new state-of-the-art facility, to see how this trade training centre has brought their neighbouring school, Waroona District High School, and Pinjarra High School together. At the opening of this impressive facility, the Shire of Murray President said he was impressed with the centre and very pleased the government, and of course he was referring to the former Labor government, were putting funds into projects such as the centre. The President went on to say that Pinjarra was experiencing about a 5% growth each year, and it needed facilities like the Trade Training Centre to cater for growth. But communities like Pinjarra and Waroona are ignored by the Prime Minister and Western Australian Liberal senators because they aren't big mining centres. What is their answer when parents ask why Western Australian schools aren't equal? But the Prime Minister and Western Australian Liberal senators want to slash first and ask questions later. WA voters won't be fooled, and they know that on the 5th of April the only safe way is to vote Labor and to vote Labor in the Senate. Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President.